Superhero fatigue. Is it real? Let's discuss. I've got Bob Cesca and Freekbass. Let's chat.
Everybody come on, let's get down. Get down.
Get down. Oh, that music. I will thank you until the end of time.
I love the way you guys edited it within your intro. It's awesome. Yeah.
I had a buddy do that video for me and he sent it over. I was like, dude, that's real. I didn't give him any direction. Just said, do something cool, whatever you think. Anyway, and then he sent that over. He goes, how's this? I'm like, perfect.
Yeah.
You just add Freekbass's name somewhere at the bottom there, and we're good to go. That's all he had to. That's the only thing he had to tweak.
That's awesome.
Gentlemen, what's going on?
Hello.
Rick, great to be here.
Thanks for being here, guys. So everybody, we've got Bob Cesca from the Bob Cesca Show, and we've got the king of funk himself, Freekbass.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, how's everybody's weekend? Oh, and by the way, we're recording this April 24th, 2023, which is a Monday morning. I've been camping with my third grader all weekend, so I'm a little sleep deprived from sleeping on cots for a few days, but it's still what we call glamping. We weren't in a tent, so I can't pretend otherwise. We had electricity, but still, it was really rough. How are you guys doing?
Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, doing great. This is I'm not accustomed to speaking this early into a microphone. I usually, because I'm older than 50, it takes a few hours to rev up to speed. So if I'm a little slow in the uptake, that's probably why. It's pretty early.
Well, I appreciate you guys doing this. I want Frick to say something too, but I'll just point this out real fast. We were all doing our little private message on Twitter last week, and I thought, we haven't done a show in a while. Let's the three of us talk. And we're bouncing around ideas. And I was kind of surprised when well, first of all, thank you, Bob, for the topic. We'll get to that in a moment, superhero fatigue. But one of you guys are the ones who proposed this time slot. And I thought, wow, I think I can pull that off. But podcasting at 9, it's 9:30 here in Texas. It's hard. Yeah. It's hard.
Yeah.
I hear you. I'm like clearing my throat and like, still shaking.
Well, once we get the show done, we can go for the early bird special later, because we're old.
That's right. That's right. Well, Freak isn't old. He's the young buck in the group here.
I'm a little sleep deprived too, because this is my first recommendation of the show. Everybody from all different circles could tell me to watch this show. If you're a Ted Lasso fan, I cannot recommend this enough. Watch Shrinking on Apple TV.
I totally agree.
Freaking good. It's a lot of the same creative team as writers, directors, etc. from Ted Lasso. It's very, very Ted Lasso-esque. Harrison Ford is freaking amazing in it. Jason Sudeikis is just, it's just so we almost binged. The reason I'm sleep deprived, literally, we did the whole season minus one episode last night after I got done streaming last night. Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, we just finished it 2 nights ago. We just watched
it's just one season, right?
Yeah. It's just one season so far. I'm sure they're going to do many, many more, hopefully, because it is an extraordinary comedy. It's so smart and so tight. And you know what? I hadn't really taken a hard look at Jason Segel as an actor, but man, that guy's got some acting chops. The whole cast.
I said Sudeikis, didn't I? Segel, right? Yes.
Jason Segel. Yeah. I'm astonished at how much range he's got. As a comedic actor, he's so good. Yeah.
I think of him in those silly early 2000, like kind of almost rom-comish movies, before this, and wow. Go ahead, Rick. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, I was just for clarification. I know the show in terms of I know it exists. I know Harrison Ford's in it, but so Sudeikis is not in it. Oh, you got that mixed up with Ted Lasso. Was
correct? Yes.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
I connected those. Okay.
Yes. Jason Segel, who was you know who he is. Ton of stuff.
But at first I was like, is Sudeikis in that also?
Yeah.
A fun side note on Sudeikis, and you guys may already know this. I'm a huge Cheers fan. Still consider it probably the finest American sitcom of all time, my opinion. But he's George Wynn's nephew. Norm.
Oh yes, I knew that.
Yeah. His mother is that's her brother, and so it's weird. I don't know. When I see them side by side, I'm like, I can see it. He's got a little of his Uncle George in him,
I can see
this
that.
This is a weird Sudeikis thing that I have in common with Jason Sudeikis. Jason Sudeikis does not have a sense of smell, and neither do I. neither of us have that ability to smell odors. It's
really,
yeah, it's weird. And when I read that he didn't have a sense of smell, I was like, hey, some solidarity from the celebrity community. Yeah.
Can you taste?
Oh,
I can taste just fine.
Oh,
Yeah, in fact, in fact, I can sometimes taste odors. That's a weird thing to say, but
oh wow.
yeah, occasionally I can. So, but yeah, no sense of smell. And it's not something that I necessarily miss because I never had it. So it's not like I'm going around going, oh, shucks, I wish I could smell those flowers. It's just not something I experience.
Wow.
So
and neither does Jason Sudeikis. So
is there anything for you? I'm fascinated by this. So is there anything at all that's strong enough that you can get the characteristics of?
Yeah, some things with fumes, some things that like ammonia or something that's got a powerful, like it just really affects you. Menthol, things like that, you can sense. But if someone held a pile of shit in front of me, I would know that it was shit because I was seeing it. But I wouldn't be able to smell it. You know what I can smell? I can smell cat pee. Because cat pee is. But that is, I think that has more to do with the fumes coming. I think that has more to do with the ammonia side of things than the actual odor.
With a litter box downstairs, I can tell you that cat piss is rancid as fuck. It is.
It is. Yeah, it is.
Oh yeah, we're gonna be cursing on this one. Sorry. So, but I want to do some plugs at the end of our little chat here. But Bob, I see you have Trek Politics podcast coming soon. Can we go ahead and discuss that for a second?
I was doing my Wednesday interview show with Mary Trump a few weeks ago, and we obviously started talking about the amazing new season of Star Trek Picard. Picard season 3 is maybe the best season of Star Trek that I've ever seen, and I've seen most of the seasons of Star Trek across all of the series. And so we got to talking about how great Picard was. Well, she hadn't seen it yet, so I was trying to tell her, yeah, you got to start watching it because it's so good. And we said, you know what? We should do this. We should do this as a show. We should start a podcast. So what we discussed was doing a Star Trek podcast from the angle of politics and examining it from a political point of view and sort of deconstructing episodes that had a political vibe to it, and then relate that to things that are going on in modern politics, things that are torn from the headlines now. So we've been talking about it and putting together ideas and a tentative guest list and things like that. So unfortunately with Mary, she's got a lot of connections along those lines. And so that's really good. So I think in June, we're going to launch the show. I'm not sure if it's going to be video and audio. We're at least going to start with an audio show and then roll out video shortly after that. But yeah, it's crazy. I'm doing a show with Donald Trump's niece.
Well, I was about to ask for clarification, just in case people were listening. It's like, Trump, yes, that Trump.
That Trump, yes,
yes. And not to get into politics on Friends from Work, because I promised Brian and Courtney I would never do that, although sometimes it'll creep in. But how can I phrase this without getting too political? She is not former President Donald Trump is not a big fan of his niece Mary. Fair to say?
No. Yeah. She. Yeah. I think they're suing each other. I want to say at this point. No, Mary's not a fan of her uncle for sure, for numerous reasons. She's written books about that, and yeah, so she's on the side of the normals, I would say.
We've all had an asshole uncle. I've had
yes, but there is no greater asshole uncle than Donald Trump. Sorry.
Zippy-doo. That's really funny.
You can trim this out, right? This is it is live.
No. This is fun. All right, so let's get to the topic, gentlemen. So I thought I'd start the show off. Forgive me, Freak, if because I look through our Twitter private feed, but sometimes we message. You got to scroll to find what you're looking for. Bob, this was your idea, this topic, correct?
Yes. But
superhero,
it is something that, it's something that people have been talking about. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And no, when you sent it over, I thought, ooh, that's good. And then Freak, you had said your friend or so-and-so had thought that would be a good topic as well. And I agreed. And that's why I'm glad that we're having this discussion, because it is, doing a little research for the show, I was watching, I don't want to call them trends because that sounds like someone that really did their homework. I didn't go that deep with it, but I did obviously just notice some peaks and valleys, some ups and downs. And the truth of the matter is there has been a dip overall in this genre of films. comic book movies over the last 3 to 5 years. Fair to say?
Yeah.
It's about right. Correct. Look, we can peel back this onion and go really down a rabbit hole about where this started. Was it something to do maybe with some of the Snyder films backlash that had this ongoing effect? But then there's the Marvel part that's also happening. So obviously the Snyder thing would have nothing to do with that. So as opposed to trying to dissect that, what I thought I would just start the conversation with, I'll start with you, Freak. There is obviously, like I said, there's a drop in some box office from here and there. But in your opinion, is there truly a fatigue, or does this have more to do with the quality or lack thereof of the films that have come out of the last 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I would say definitely that was going to be my whole, thesis of this whole entire show. I think it's definitely the latter. I mean, quality, quality and star power and all that. I mean, jumping over to Marvel quickly, I think. I mean, I love the whole new phase that Marvel's in right now too, as well. But the reality is there's no Robert Downey Jr. in that, and there's no star. They don't have. That's why I'm kind of hoping that the rumors of Adam Driver actually being Reed Richards. I don't know if you guys have seen that or not in the new Fantastic Four. I hope there's some truth to that, because I think they need a star that can bounce between movies, to like they had in phase 1 and 2 and 3 with Downey Jr. So I think in terms of the Marvel side, I think it's that. And again, I think it all goes back to quality, because I know Joker's probably now 3 or 4 years old, but I mean, that movie made, and that was on that list you sent over to us, that movie still made over $1 billion too as well. And that was during this kind of period that we're kind of talking about right now. And because it was a freaking incredible freaking movie with an incredible freaking actor, and
Sure.
And I think if anything, the fatigue comes from just oversaturation more than anything else. I think that's where it is. And the oversaturation leads to less than higher quality things, and that's kind of why I look at it overall.
Do you think that Disney Plus has anything to do with this? In other words, the Marvel shows, or even to kind of dip our toe in Lucasfilm, the Star Wars stuff also, is that having a negative effect on the response that audience are giving these films in terms of box office? Or
yeah, I think that's a little bit, but with the Disney Plus shows, I mean, I thought WandaVision still, I think it was genius. I thought Loki was verging on genius too as well. Even Falcon and Winter Soldier, those first 2 or 3 out of the gate were just, I thought, incredible. Now the last few, She-Hulk, and I wasn't the biggest fan of that, and I think that felt definitely like a quality control thing, just if nothing else because of the CGI being so scatterbrains. One show it looked great, one show it looked like it was Shrek, so and again, that goes to I'm sure, and again, the pandemic plays into all this too, I'm sure too, as well, with the oversaturation with everything. But Marvel's, I don't know, I think the fatigue, I know we're not going to sit here, and I don't want to get into a DC versus Marvel conversation, because that's its own show. But in terms of the oversaturation and the quality control, I definitely seem to generally feel it more in the Marvel area, just because they put so much more stuff out in the last few years, Yeah. So I don't know. How do you guys feel about that?
Well, Bob, I'll pass it to you. What do you think?
Yeah, I've had a concern, and again, I'm not necessarily singling out Marvel. I'm just using maybe Marvel as an example of what Freak was talking about, which is my concern comes from both the saturation of these things, the vast number of shows and movies that are coming out, on top of the fact that the storytelling, or I put it this way, the storytelling is kind of all over the place. The multiverse aspect of the Marvel universe, I think, is not confusing to those of us who are ensconced in this stuff all the time. We can follow along with this, but I think general audiences may get lost because of how all over the place it is. If you compare the current Marvel phase to the first phase, the original Avengers, starting with Iron Man and so on, it was relatively easy to follow along. It was a smaller group of characters. We understood who these characters were. They carried that phase on through, and it wasn't very confusing. You could kind of, as a general audience member, as someone who would just like going to these movies and who doesn't necessarily ensconce themselves in the mythology, you could follow along with that a lot better. With the multiverse, you've got multiple characters from multiple periods of time interacting, and it gets very confusing. Timeline stuff, time travel stuff, multiverse stuff is always confusing just by nature. And that, for those of us who love it, that's what makes it fun to an extent, because you don't know what's going to happen next. There's a suspenseful quality to it. Like, what are they going to do? How are they going to top that? And so the fact that it is so scattered, I think, is losing some audience and maybe some critics as well, because I think critics also tend to reflect what general audiences are thinking, because, you know, they're seeing not only comic book movies on a regular basis, but they're also seeing other kinds of movies. So they're fitting the comic book movie genre into the general, you know, theatrical run of other films. And so I think the superhero fatigue comes from storytelling, both good and bad. Where it's good, interesting stuff to see a multiverse and see what can be done with timelines, where on the bad side, that can tend to get confusing for audiences. Like if you've got multiple franchises, you've got DC happening at the same time, a lot of audiences go, what is this? Is this Marvel? Is this DC? I don't understand where this is taking place.
You know, I couldn't agree more. And I talk about this with Star Wars also, watching this last season of Mandalorian especially. It's like, man, if you don't know the animated stuff, you don't know some of the EU, if you don't know Rebels, there's so many. These aren't just subtle references. These are things on the nose that are pertinent to the storyline of a specific episode. Maybe not everything, but quite a bit of stuff. Characters, what have you. The balancing, the trick I always say in these situations, at least just from my layman perspective, is that you have to please the core audience, but they have to remember that, I don't know, I'm going to pull this out of my ass, but let's say 75% of the people that go see these movies aren't those hardcore fans that are obsessed with the stuff, that follow it like the three of us do, right? That live on social media about it. They don't know, they don't care. They just want a fun time, escapism at the movie. And if they're watching it and they're like, who are these people? I saw part 2. This is part 3, and I'm lost because it's tying into a multiverse or this film over here or the Avengers or Suicide Squad or whatever it may be. And if you lose that audience to try to overly please the core audience, then I think that's obviously counterproductive. But to not utilize that lore and bring it in and incorporate things is also doing everything a disservice. Like, I don't envy them, and now they're kind of stuck with it. You know, I'm going to read a quote from James Gunn, and I want to pass this back over to you, Freak. This was just recently in Rolling Stone, and and by the way, with him, Marvel specifically, he feels like the blip thing has also caused some problems in terms of how to write some of these characters and where to put them and whatever. That's an interesting perspective. But this quote was cool. He said, I think there is such thing as superhero fatigue, he tells Rolling Stone. I think it doesn't have anything to do with superheroes. It has to do with the kind of stories that get to be told. And if we lose your eye on the ball, which is character, we love Superman, we love Batman, we love Iron Man because they're incredible, these incredible characters that we have in our hearts. And if it becomes just a bunch of nonsense on screen, it can get really, really boring. And I think what he's saying there in essence is kind of like what you said, Freak, that it's not about superhero fatigue. It's about studios sort of mass producing and not putting the TLC maybe behind some of these projects as they could. And now we're getting quantity over quality. Do you see it that way as well? Do you agree with that?
I do. And, but I wonder, you know, especially with Kevin Feige, we all know that, you know, Kevin Feige's always thinking probably 10 years ahead of the way we're thinking right now with everything. And, all this, you know, these multiple characters and all this and the way it's all coming together. I mean, we're going to find out in a few years when Secret Wars happens, Avengers Secret Wars, if it all kind of all ties together and all makes sense. But, you know, I still have I'm not ready to throw the talent on someone like a Kevin Feige and Marvel. Like I have a feeling they're still going to somehow blend all these multiple characters from multiple areas. Yeah, it's a little confusing right now, but I still put my money on. I bet $1,000 right now that Infinity War may be a $2 billion, not Infinity War, excuse me, Secret Wars, maybe almost a $2 billion movie when it finally drops, especially with Kang, with the Kang Dynasty. Obviously that has to do with a lot of other events, which we'll get in, with what happens with Jonathan Majors and all that kind of stuff. But like in terms of if everything, yeah, that's a whole different subject. But if everything goes semi smoothly there and they're able to bridge that, I mean, that could be, bringing probably Hugh Jackman being back in Secret Wars, and there's rumors of Tobey Maguire, doing some of the Spider-Man stuff. Just like that could just be like freaking huge,
Well, and I'm glad you actually referenced Tobey Maguire, because it made me think of something too, in terms of the narrative of fatigue. And obviously there's some true metrics that we can look at that can reinforce one way or another your opinion on it. But is it sometimes unfair also to compare some of these films or franchises, what have you, to these juggernaut box office, lightning in a bottle anomalies? Like, for instance, Spider-Man No Way Home, that crossed 2 billion, did it not? Or it came really close.
I think it was close. Yeah.
Let's just call it a $2 billion juggernaut. So we're going to compare everything to that. Star Wars or the sequel trilogy really has to live up to The Force Awakens doing $2 billion. Like, you know what I'm saying? I feel like that sometimes we can put these impossible.
Right. For sure.
You do a film that's, and I'll take Star Wars, for instance. The Rise of Skywalker, despite personal opinions of it, is just a shy of $1.1 billion. It was considered a failure by a lot of people. I'm like, really? Right. Is that where we're at now? Like, $1 billion film is a failure because it didn't do 2 billion like one of its predecessors. So, do you think that, Bob, do you think that has anything to do with it in terms of, are we putting some kind of impossible standards on some of these franchises, and or films? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Rick, because I was just thinking about that from the perspective of the general Hollywood community view of comic book movies. And they are controversial to an extent, insofar as I think that town has a love-hate relationship with these movies. They're keeping theatrical runs alive, basically. Right. And I think there's resentment about that. Like, okay, now this comic book movie genre has taken over movie theaters. What are we going to do about that? Or should we do anything about that? And I think the expectation has to be, well, if you're going to do this, make sure you do it big. If you're going to take over every multiplex in the country for basically year round at this point, you better make sure you bring in a lot of money into the industry. And when you don't, and at the same time you're sucking the air out of what gets run theatrically, that expectation diminishes, or the leeway that's given to comic book movies, insofar as there is any leeway, gets ruined, because you got to deliver. If you're gonna dominate the theater space, you better deliver the money. Sure. Or else you're useless.
Right. You're absolutely. And you're right. They are taking over, because let's face it, let's take an art house film or just sort of a straightforward drama that we don't seem to get theatrically much when I say post COVID, you guys know what I mean by that. I mean, post 2020, yeah. Let's just call that. We're not post COVID, but anyway, so if of all the theaters, for instance, the Cinemarks, the AMCs, etc., are focusing on, every screen being an IMAX, what I'm saying? Like, it's all geared towards that. The technology that they're putting into these theaters isn't geared towards the next Glengarry Glen Ross or American Beauty, or Mystic River, or, a Spike Lee joint or whatever. It's for, big sci-fi and comic book stuff. That's what it's for. And thank God we have all this streaming stuff with Apple and Hulu and things, and Netflix, that we can create great drama content and put, F-list or Z-list actors like me maybe to work. But yeah, they are. And, they talk about, you know, you hear people talk about Tom Cruise and how he held on to Top Gun and waited for the theatrical release. And Steven Spielberg even is on camera telling him, you know, you saved Hollywood. There may be a little bit of truth to that. So Freak, here's the $1 million question. If all this is true, what Bob just said, and I'm just kind of peppering it with some anecdotal stuff here, does that give you, is it exciting for you as a fan of this stuff? Because there's obviously going to be so much more content coming. Or are you nervous about this just getting more watered down and maybe more of a fatigue if indeed that is a real thing?
I mean, if I'm being totally honest, I do get a little, you know, I even know myself, I was like you know, just a few years ago, you know, obviously part of it again is you know, we always got to throw in the COVID thing in there, but just generally whatever superhero movie came out, Marvel or DC, it was a given I'm going to the theater probably the weekend of or the weekend after that's getting released. I'll give you an example. Shazam, you know, Shazam 2. I really enjoyed the first Shazam movie. I saw it at the theater. I actually saw that I don't know if you guys remember with Shazam, they did like they released it a few weeks early, like an early ticket thing, you know, did one of those. And so I even did that because I was like, oh my gosh, this movie's going to be so big. And I still have not seen Shazam 2 yet, you know, and, and so it's shocking to me that I'm sitting here even saying that. Like, I don't think that would have came out of my mouth even a few years ago. And can
we discuss that for a second?
Sure.
I want to throw something at you on that. I mean, interrupt that, but I think this is important. You guys are both big Zack Snyder fans, fair to say, in his films.
Yeah.
I agree with most of your opinions on those films. There's one or two that we may have differences on, but overall, I mean, I understand what an artistic bad MFer he can be. But is your inability, or your not inability, but your lack of enthusiasm to go see Shazam, does it, even on a subconscious level, if you can think about it, have anything to do with the fact that you know that this Snyderverse is ultimately probably not going to really see much more in terms of the James Gunn taking over DC films, and you're like, what's the point of going to see this? They're probably not bringing any of these characters back anyway, so why do I care? Is there any of that with you?
Maybe a little bit, probably. No, I mean, I don't know if that's it or not. And I you know, Shazam specifically, and I think I sent you guys a tweet about this, and I'm not trying to throw shade on anybody at all, but part of it was that, you know, I didn't think the trailer was that great to begin with. It seemed pretty generic compared to the first movie too, as well, and just the whole dynamic. You know, if we're specifically talking about Shazam, it just seemed it didn't have the sparkle and magic that the first one had. Billy Batson seemed too old. Like Billy Batson seemed that he almost should be the superhero. I mean, he's like, looks like he's 21, 22. I know he's supposed to be 17, but he looks like he's in his early 20s, you know? And Zachary Levi, I don't know. The dynamic, it just seemed
different.
It seems silly versus the first movie. It's almost kind of like the same thing going on the Marvel side of stuff. Like, I loved Ragnarok, you know, Thor Ragnarok, but it's almost like they made what was it, Love and Thunder, that on steroids, you know, and took all the, like they thought Ragnarok, what made it successful is just the silly part, which it was. I mean, that was part of it, but that wasn't just it. It was still the story ultimately. So focusing on the wrong things or whatever on there. So I think it goes back to the very first thing you asked me when we started this conversation. I think it's a quality control thing more than anything else in that. Yeah.
I think you used a word, Freak, that I think is appropriate in this conversation, which is generic. I think what we're running into storytelling wise, and I think this may be at the top of my list in terms of if there is superhero fatigue, this is what's causing it. And it's the same story. Generally speaking, you can take every single one of these movies, especially lately, and kind of overlay them, and you're going to get the same story beats. You're going to get the same kinds of humor in them. You're going to get the big boss battle at the end. I mean, this is something that's been going on for some time now, which is probably why people are getting tired of it. And going back to what you're saying about Zack Snyder too, and his movie, the movies that he directed in the DCEU. One of the things that appealed to me about those movies is they kind of broke that format a little bit. They kind of gave us something that was a little bit different than what we were seeing over at Marvel. It was giving us something, I think DC at that point in time, and it kind of failed just in terms of overall fan reaction. But what DC was doing early on with Zack Snyder, I thought was valuable insofar it was trying to do something a little bit different than what we were getting elsewhere. And that is I think, even though some of those beats fell flat, it kind of was the right track. And what I'm waiting for now is someone to do something, not reject the canon or who these characters are or these universes that they exist in. Keep that, but the stories that are being told around them, something new needs to happen. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of James Gunn and what he's doing, both at Marvel and subsequently, and more importantly, at least to me, at DC. Between the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, that's the right thing. That's the right approach. I think that sort of vibe could, I don't know what you would call it, could erase a little bit of the superhero fatigue, could ease that. Because as he takes over this new soft reboot or whatever you want to call it with the DCU, I think that's going to be a positive move towards something along the lines of what I'm talking about, which is a fresh approach to the storytelling, something that breaks that kind of generic format of these projects.
I agree. And I'm going to keep you here for a second, if you don't mind. I was just thinking this on the fly, so forgive me if this seems not correct in y'all's head, but I just started thinking about Superman the movie, right? 1978 proved that a live action comic book film could work.
Yeah.
Batman 89 proved that 11 years later proved that a gritty, grounded, realistic, quasi-realistic interpretation of said characters can also work and be a big box office hit. And then I would fast forward to probably something like The Dark Knight, which proved that these films can be billion-dollar box office kings, right? Mm-hmm. And then you can go to Spider-Man No Way Home, another $2 billion juggernaut, and prove that nostalgia sells. But what I think gets missing in some of these conversations, I feel like those films are the ones that get brought up the most, at least in my head. But if you look at Avengers Endgame, $2.8 billion. Why did that film do as well as it did, in my view? Is because you could have taken that movie and taken all the action out of it, which was phenomenal. And what you still have left is a character study of and a good drama. Yeah. And like that. And I know James Gunn didn't do that film, although I don't, if he's had association with that, forgive me. He didn't co-write or anything that, right? Because the brothers handled all that. Right.
Yeah.
So
insofar as Guardians of the Galaxy was involved in those,
right.
Infinity War and Endgame,
right?
Yeah, he had an executive producer role, but that was about it.
But with the Guardians of the Galaxy stuff, he's also sort of reinforcing, or Endgame's reinforcing him, however we want to phrase it, that true character-driven stuff can work, which goes to his quote. Now, here's my question to you, Bob, and then we'll pass it on to Freak, and I'm tying it into what I'm talking about right now. How important is this new Guardians of the Galaxy film, for Marvel, but also for the kind of response it gets for James Gunn as he's launching his DC? He's now, Superman's in pre-production. My guess is he's already got it cast. It's just not announcing it yet.
I bet he does. Yeah.
If we're doing costume stuff, like he's made that public, he's got a Superman. Yeah. But how important, Bob, is Guardians of the Galaxy, the reaction from critics, from audience, and from box office for Marvel and for James Gunn to launch DC in you know what I mean? Like, how pertinent is that to that transition for him, you think?
That's a really good question. I think it's, I don't think it's going to have that much bearing. I think James Gunn is pretty much locked in his role at DC, and I think that's not going to change for some time now. I've been reading, I don't know if there's any validity to it whatsoever, but I've been reading some things here or there on social media about how Warner Brothers is upset, just going over to the DC side, is upset and kind of blaming James Gunn's rollout of the DCU for Shazam 2's poor reception. And I don't know if there's any validity to that. And there could be a case made, we're talking about an extraordinarily subjective world that revolves around these projects, critics, audiences, and so on. So someone's going to make that argument. If Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 doesn't do very well, there are going to be people saying, oh, well, maybe James Gunn's not up for taking over the DCU. And some people are going to say, well, that's kind of irrelevant because his involvement in Marvel's done anyway. So what difference does it make? So it's just going to depend on who you're or what circles you're operating in, what discussion forums you're reading. But ultimately, I don't think it's going to affect him at all. I think Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is going to do just fine. It's not going to break any gigantic box office records necessarily. It's going to do well enough that his status, I think, will be secure. And I think it's important that, irrespective of how Volume 3 goes, that we give James Gunn a chance, that we give him an opportunity to stretch his wings with the DCU, see what this is all about, and just from the bare perspective of that breath of fresh air may be what's needed to give this genre a kick in the ass and get it going again.
Absolutely.
I really believe that. I think that James Gunn could be the future of all of this. Maybe not eclipsing Feige, but certainly taking a spot in the pantheon. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So,
now,
yeah.
Superman does need to work for him. I don't think he was going to get the boot from DC.
Oh well, yeah, that's going to be crucial.
That has to work.
Yeah,
that could be the difference in, well, everything.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a big deal because I think focusing on, Zaslav and Warner's are right to focus on their big properties: Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the Trinity. Because I think one of the things that is creating this fatigue is we're getting a lot of lesser known characters in the mix, like Blue Beetle coming out. That's a gigantic question mark to me. I mean, I think that it's going to do okay, but a lot of general audiences have no idea who Blue Beetle is, whether it's Marvel, whether it's DC. It's just such a I don't know, a murky thing to predict at this point.
Sure.
So, yeah.
So Freak, on that note, what comes to my mind is Deadpool, a character that had a cult following, and it was also a rated R film, and it comes out and it's I bet there's a lot of opposition in that in boardrooms and a lot of people that had egg on their face. But to the looking at it objectively, I guess, how am I trying to phrase this? The risk worked on that, but it is still risky if you're introducing these characters and and box office is down and you don't have the Kings carrying you, although there's obviously things happening when the Kings are returning. But what do you think of that? Do you think that if like Blue Beetle doesn't work, are we also going to run into a situation where we're going to rely too heavily on the same 3 to 4 properties? Or do you think we'll still keep taking chances where things like Black Panther and Deadpool and other things that were not mainstream became mainstream because of the movies themselves? What do you think?
That's a great question. I mean, one question, I'm curious, do you guys think Blue Beetle will do better than Shazam 2?
I would say probably. And let me say this about Shazam 2. I took my young daughters to see it and I had a blast, but I got to admit, so much of that was because I was in between a 9-year-old little girl and an 11-year-old little girl who they loved every second of it. And so I just, I don't know what my real opinion of that movie is. All I can tell you is I had a blast with my kids at it.
Yeah.
I can say, right? But I can say Black Adam, as much as I wanted to love that movie, that's very, very forgettable. It's not terrible.
Yeah.
I can't say that it's bad for me. It's like, I can't say anything about it because I don't remember a damn scene in it.
That movie, that was falling victim to, we don't know what to do with these movies anymore.
Right.
That was I think the headline with Black Adam is, what is this? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to say with this? And it seems like this was a studio just throwing everything against the wall to see what sticks.
For sure.
It was just so, I mean, if you could have an oversaturation within the course of a single movie, it was like The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, just kind of threw everything at this, and it was so desperate to say, hey, look at us, look what we're doing.
I know.
Instead of just letting the characters breathe and to play out kind of a reasonable narrative, it was just so over the top that it just felt so boardroomish to me.
Did.
It felt like a bunch of guys sitting around. You know what it needs? It needs this. Okay, let's put that in. Oh, you know what we need here? We need a bunch of guys exploding. Put that in.
Yeah. How do you guys think with this whole conversation, and you guys know all the buzz, and we're going to find out a lot tomorrow because I think it debuts at CinemaCon tomorrow, but how do you guys think, I mean, I know how we all personally feel about it with Keaton and everything being in there, but I mean, do you see The Flash being like, let's say $1 billion movie? Do you think it's going to be $1 billion movie?
Bob, I'm going to have you answer that if you don't mind. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to frame my last thing I had written here for our last kind of quick conversation because it ties into that. So here's what's on the horizon. Okay, before James Gunn's DC really takes off: Flash, aforementioned Flash, Aquaman 2, and then obviously the Batman, which is not part of the DCU. Thank God that's going to have its own black label and do its thing. And
is that coming out before Superman Legacy?
You know what? No, it may not actually be released before, but I just mean in terms it's, you know,
it's already established.
It's established. It's going to happen. Right.
Got it.
Timeline. And then obviously Joker 2, which is another black label thing. So perfect segue for that last topic, and then to your question. So you were asking us if we think that Flash should be $1 billion film, right?
Yeah. Based off of all because you guys are hearing all the I mean, the buzz is like huge on that movie, you know. Yeah. So, and I don't think that's just all. You know, I know that happens with a lot of movies, but it feels legit from all the circles that are saying it too, as well. The buzz on it, yeah. And
I've talked to friends like our mutual friend Mark Hughes, who has a lot of optimism for this film in terms of goodwill for everybody. But Bob, what do you think? What are your predictions on not just Flash, but even like, let's say Aquaman 2 more specifically, because it's still kind of tied into all this. How do you see this unfolding?
I mean, I think it's undoubtedly going to be a gigantic movie, The Flash, for no other reason but Michael Keaton being in it, and the fact that apparently, at least according to some people who have seen it already, James Gunn in particular, who I think is relatively unvarnished. He doesn't seem like a guy who's going to cheerlead a movie the way he has. That's subpar. No one wants to. The way Hollywood works is no one wants to be the person who's wrong about something. You know.
Sure.
It's everything is done by committee as well as this. Do we like this? Yes, we like this. Oh, yes. So we do like this. So in that regard, I think it's going to be a gigantic movie. I think it's going to be a little bit divisive in terms of fan reception. I think there are going to be some people who just absolutely despise it. And there are, a couple of little red flags along those lines that I'm seeing. The question mark is Ezra Miller himself. Another question mark, I think, and this is something that I sometimes feel all alone about, but I think there's going to be some criticism of the Batman costume on Michael Keaton. That may turn some fans away. I don't know, but I think it's overall going to be one of those gigantic events that everyone's going to be talking about. There's going to be major social media conversations about this beyond just the fandom. I think you're going to see a lot of general audiences talking about this movie. On the other hand, I think Aquaman is going to be a disaster. Aquaman 2. I mean, talk about a fall. I think isn't Aquaman, the first Aquaman movie, the highest grossing DC movie that we've seen recently, at least in the DCEU. In
fact, it may even be higher grossing than The Dark Knight, which was just slightly higher grossing than The Dark Knight Rises. So I think Aquaman and Joker and Dark Knight are the kind of, in Dark Knight Rises, the $4 or $5 billion films that I can think of off the top of my head. But we'll see. It has the same director, but I don't, who knows how that's going to play out. Aquaman, to me, that movie was just designed for the theater. It was so beautiful. I could have just watched it without dialogue.
Yeah. I love the first movie. I've heard some rumors about the current movie that indicate that it's not good. And I think Warner Brothers Discovery is a little bit soft on it right now. I think they're not convinced that it's going to do what it needs to do. And so it's probably the best move is to probably move on after that, which is what they're going to be doing.
Yeah, that's and Freak, that was going to kind of be my last question here to just tie into the last topic is, what are your predictions? Because I think that and to answer your question directly for me, I think that The Flash is going to do really well. Is it going to be a billion-dollar film? I don't know. Maybe. What I'd like to see is it just have good legs and have really good reviews. Yeah. And as far as online fandom, I've kind of given up on really giving a shit too much about that. Right. But I certainly do care about how it's perceived critically, because that, 25 years from now, I don't know. I was about to say that's really what matters, but I'm like, man, I don't know. Maybe Rotten Tomatoes has changed that a little bit, where, Yelp matters more to restaurants now than a New York Times review of a new restaurant opening. So, we're in this upside down, real weird world. But in terms of The Flash, what's going to be fascinating is this, and really we can talk about this with any of these films, is they have their plans. I don't think James Gunn is sitting around going, okay, before we make this decision, let's see how The Flash does at the box office. I really don't. Could be wrong, but I don't think that's the case. I think their plan is their plan, and whatever happens with this, so be it, right? And maybe with The Flash, maybe if it's just so damn good and so popular that they can bring Keaton back and do something that's Black Label or whatever, if they want to, right? The good thing about the Black Label or the multiverse, whatever, it is opening up a justification for a lot of different avenues we can go down, because we're about to have, in essence, Affleck, Keaton, Pattinson, and then James Gunn's Batman that's probably already written. That's 4 or 5 live action Batmans kind of existing simultaneously. Isn't that crazy to say that out loud? I mean, yeah, you know what I mean? But what do you just generally speaking, do you think that this is it? That once these films are over, the Snyder era is gone? Or what I mean by that is
never
is the okay, let me rephrase that. Not gone. I mean, are any of these actors from his universe going to reprise their role in once James Gunn officially launches DC?
I think the biggest wild card, especially to Flash, and kind of, she's not officially, I guess, a Snyder person, but it's still in that, obviously, that world technically, I guess, is and you and I have talked about this, both of us have talked about this, is the Sasha Calle question.
Ooh,
Supergirl.
Yeah, right. Because, that's great. That's a great one. That's great.
Obviously Gunn's already said he's doing a Supergirl movie. A few years out, this probably won't be till 28, 29, something like that. But she's at the age where she could play Supergirl for the next 10 years at least. And if the buzz with her, just from, again, this is all judging off these great trailers we've seen so far and from the buzz we're hearing about the movie, but I just have a feeling she's going to be the breakout star from that movie. And it's going to be, Gunn's very, he knows what the silly stuff is online, just like we do too as well. But if there's like this groundswell online, just people just really, really connecting with her and having an emotional connection with her, which I think could happen from especially the way that they're doing this whole movie with her. It sounds like it's going to be a pretty emotional thing, even how they, get her, break her out of the prison or whatever they end up doing. I think that's going to be, again, the wild card with that too, as well as her,
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, she's my God, just watching those trailers. Yeah, you can see it coming down Main Street that she is going to be. I so agree with you, Freak, that she is going to be.
She pops. I mean, you just look at a still of her and she just pops off there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that one shot where she's screaming at Zod, what are you doing? Oh my God, that's one of the best single performance moments, and we've seen it in just a trailer.
Yeah.
And so I think James Gunn would be nuts to recast that role.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Maybe he could tweak the costume or something and just make her slightly different enough to fit into the DCU. But I think coming out of this, I'm perfectly willing to go out on a limb and say that she is going to be the big star coming out of this next movie, The Flash.
Yeah, because Batman 2, Joker 2, Aquaman 2, Flash, Superman, these are all the next DC films upcoming with Marvel, the Marvels, Guardians. We have the Spider-Verse animated film. And then obviously there's going to be another Tom Holland Spider-Man movie as well. I mean, this isn't slowing down, right? I don't, but I don't want it to. So I want to get back to a little bit better quality over quantity, where and look, and again, we talked about impossible barometers. I don't think everything has to hit $1 billion, but if it can just hit on the cylinders, right? Good reviews, some good audience goodwill, good legs. Legs are important, right?
Yeah.
You know, like Batman Begins is a good example. That's not that big of a box office film when you compare it to its sequels and everything else, but it had legs, right?
Yeah.
It came out, had goodwill, and people kept going to see it. And so that's what
like the Suicide Squad. The Suicide Squad was the same way. James Gunn's The Suicide Squad had legs. It didn't do gigantic box office, but I think there was so much potential built up in that, you know, obviously he's going to carry some of those characters over to the DCU.
Yeah. I mean, look, the Batman wasn't $1 billion film. I don't think it needed to be, especially a 3-hour detective noir film. But I will say this, all eyes are on the sequel.
Oh, yeah.
You know, one thing I wanted to throw in here, just to put it out in the universe, I think one thing that could help the genre overall, and I'm going to narrow it down to the DCU. I think one thing that James Gunn could borrow from that I think would be really effective as far as keeping audience attention is, instead of creating one long narrative arc like the Marvel universe, I think if James Gunn looked to what Star Wars and Star Trek are doing, in terms of mini narratives that arc over, you know, maybe a couple of movies and a couple of TV series that take place, you know, in different time periods, where, you know, with Star Wars, for example, we're seeing this post Return of the Jedi era. We're also seeing what's going to happen after the sequel trilogy. We're going to go back to the High Republic. In Star Trek, we're looking, you know, we just finished a sort of a Next Generation completion. We're also looking at what happens prior to Kirk taking over the Enterprise with Strange New Worlds. And I think if DC did a similar thing, I think that would be much more digestible for general audiences, which are all important, going back to what I was originally saying. If you can keep the attention span of general audiences, that is the ball game entirely.
That's right.
And there's fandom can only take a project so far, or a genre so far. Then it starts to get diminishing returns and fall apart over time. But if you've got general audiences and you can hold those general audiences, giving them digestible, you know, these sort of mini arcs, I think will be much more effective than the larger, oh my God, you mean I have to remember something that happened 12 years ago to apply to a movie that's going to happen 5 years from now? That's a lot to ask general audiences. You know what I mean? So,
it's a lot to ask.
Yeah, just throwing that out there.
No, that's great. Well, look, we're approaching an hour, so I'd say let's wrap this up and I'll get out of here. But Freak, I was going to give you the floor to I want you guys to plug, if you don't mind, please. But also, just any final thoughts on all this, just to kind of put a bow on it.
Well, again, I'll go back to the very beginning of our conversation. It really just comes down to quality, and you know, the movie. I think the fatigue thing. It's a nice narrative for us to talk about, and I'm sure, and you know, it's a real thing for sure. But you know, if again, this Flash movie is going to be almost like the canary in the coal mine, I guess. You know, if it's as good as everybody says it is, and it does, you know, close to $1 million or billion, excuse me, and does well and has legs, as you say, I think that'll kind of be the answer to all this. There's so much good stuff coming out. You know, you mentioned Joker 2. I mean, I'm so freaking excited for that movie. You guys know I'm a Joker fanatic, and I think that's going to be, with the addition of Lady Gaga in it as Harley Quinn. I mean, wow, just wow. So yeah, I think you know, but it's not like it's going away in a couple years. You know, you, me, and Bob will be having this conversation probably 10 years from now, except we'll virtually be in the same room together or something like that. It'll be going on
hopefully.
At that point. Yeah.
Hopefully this show has a lot more money behind it.
There you go. Exactly. That's right.
All right. Well, where can we find you, buddy? And any plugs you want to throw out there?
Yeah. Well, you know, I pretty much live online anymore. I'm either over at TikTok or over at Twitch, and you know, I'm doing a ton of live streaming. We're excited. Next month, I'm playing a really cool music festival in Illinois. It's called Summer Camp Music Festival. Willie Nelson, Les Claypool, Wolfpack. Wow. It's gonna be really good. And I'm doing 2 shows. I'm doing one with my whole band, Freekbass and the Bump Assembly, and then everything I kind of do on TikTok and Twitch, which is kind of kind of like a solo Groose thing. I'm going to be doing at the VIP tent, so I'm playing twice that day with both incarnations of myself. So so yeah, a lot of mostly online. I just live online more than anything else anymore. Yeah,
that's so great. Where can we find you on Twitter?
Yeah, I'm over twitter.com at Freekbass. That's FREEK 2 E's BASS. Yeah,
love it. Thank you so much. All right, Mr. Bob.
All right. So just to wrap up the conversation, I think storytelling is everything in any genre. If you can tell a great story, doesn't matter. I think superheroes are going to be around forever and ever and ever. This is what we do with them, what writers, directors do with these things. And I think it's so important for studios to allow directors to stretch their legs and inject a little auteur style into some of these films, to put their own individual stamp on these things, sort of like what Taika did with Ragnarok. I think that it was a great example you brought up earlier, Freak. Little departures like that, I think, will continue to breathe new life into these stories and into these characters, and that's absolutely crucial. So yeah, I think it's all about that. As far as what I do, my politics podcast is bobcescashow.com, right there. And also you can find it everywhere you get your podcast. That's my Patreon. bobcescashow.com is my Patreon page. And also Trek Politics with me and Mary Trump coming up in June to coincide with the rollout of Strange New World Season 2.
So I do need to get Paramount Plus, pretty much, right? It comes down to it, right?
Yeah. Oh my God, Strange New Worlds and Picard Season 3 is some of the best Star Trek I've ever seen. It's
all right,
absolutely a must-watch thing. Even if you don't really love Star Trek, it's that good.
I do. And I kept I have so many freaking streaming services, but it's like, I was like, I don't think I can avoid it any longer. Yeah.
But the fact that we talk about this on podcast makes it a write-off. So there's that.
There you go.
Throwing that out there.
All right. I'm sold.
I love it. Well, thank you guys so much for a great conversation as always.
Thanks,
I appreciate it. And thanks for listening, everybody. Brian Chatlin and Courtney Cheek had a really good show they recorded on, I believe, Friday, wrapping up The Mandalorian and the last episode of the entire season 3. They should have that edited up as a podcast soon, so be looking for that. I'm Rick Shew. Once again, thank you, Bob Cesca and Freekbass, for this conversation. Superhero Fatigue. Follow us on all social media platforms and wherever you get great podcasts. We'll see you next time. Thank you.